Roger, thanks for dropping by. Sunday chat today is going to wander around a subject that I often get asked and I've asked other people myself, and it's along the lines of, how can you tell you're not a beginner anymore? Well, first statement following that, the learning never stops. The rate at which you learn tails off, but you learn something all the time. Little snippets come up that you didn't know, and you go, ah, I'll remember that, and then you probably forget it. And therein lies one thing I would suggest, is evidence. Keep notes, take photographs or videos or both, whatever, but keep evidence of progression of plants, because you'll forget. You'll pick up a plant and think, what did that look like at the start of the season? Has it grown much? And you can check how you're progressing and how well your plants are doing or not, which is just as important, if not more so. If a plant's growing well and it's happy, you haven't got much to do, have you? But if it's not, your work starts. This is where you've got to find out why. And eventually, I think part of not really being a beginner anymore is just knowing and not really having to work it out. Therein lies a lot of the difference. So what I thought I'd do is I'd start at the very beginning of the whole process and go through the stages and what makes somebody perhaps a better grower or closer to what's classed as an expert, whatever the hell that is, and what it's based on really what mistakes can be made at the various stages of orchid growing. First of all, get your place sorted out where your orchids are going to be, preferably before the orchids are there, but that don't happen, does it? We get our orchids, then we try and make a place for them, make them comfortable, make them happy, give them a nice growing environment. That's never going to be perfect, so that's mistake number one, thinking it will be. You can get close, but unless you just grow one type of orchid, it's not going to be right for all of them. I mean, like me, I've got a varied collection. Well, this place here is spot on for some of my orchids, but it's not spot on for all of them. It's a way off for some of them, and they don't grow as well as a consequence. Perhaps the mistake I made was getting them in the first place, thinking I could grow them. But I like to have a go, you know, that's me. So anyway, where do we start? Well, we start by buying orchids, don't we? Well, we might get given some. I mean, I've been given quite a few along the way. But places to buy, good places to buy, are at a nursery. And I would suspect out of the people who watch my videos, the number who can get to a good nursery is very, very, very low. Yeah? In some cases it would mean a ridiculous amount of travel, possibly even getting on a big silver bird and whizzing up in the air to get somewhere. Yeah? In other cases, like me, I can get to one nursery. There are other nurseries around, one of which I would like to go to, but it's a hell of a long way. It's half a day's drive. Well, then you've got to come back again or stop overnight. So it sort of takes the edge right off of it. But I would suggest a nursery is probably the best place. You'll have somebody there who knows what they're talking about and knows what they're doing. That's not the same as in a garden centre or a do-it-yourself place where there's loads of orchids on display and there's not a soul in the place who knows anything about them whatsoever. But they'll pretend they do to make the sale, because their job is selling. In a nursery, they have to sell stuff to earn a living, but they won't give you a duff plant. It's very rare for somebody in a nursery to knowingly sell you a bad one. On the grounds, it'll come back and bite their whatnot. Because you won't go back there again if you thought you were deliberately picked on to get rid of a plant we could do without, that sort of thing. But the other types of places don't really care, because their priority is just sales, and if they've been stuck on plants this week, God, I'd rather be on paint. Oh, I'd rather be out on the flipping shrubs outside in the fresh air. I've got indoor plants this week. They don't, half the time they don't even want to be there. So places to buy. Online, obviously, you can get very good plants online. You can get stitched up a right treat. So try and ask around. You know, there's Facebook groups around, and each country or group of countries will have reasonable sellers online and some that just can't be trusted. Word gets round nowadays with the internet. So somebody who sells pretty duff plants on the internet, I can think of 2 or 3, they've been going quite a few years and they're still selling plants. And the only reason they're getting away with it is people are not talking to each other. They're working in isolation, which is never a good idea. You know, so they're actually buying from this place and perhaps getting 1 good plant and 2 pretty lousy ones. But they don't know any different because they haven't asked and talked to other people. So, you know, try and communicate where you can, and try and find people who are buying orchids online in your place. You know, I mean, soon I'm going to be limited to buying online in the UK because I won't have an import license, will I, after Brexit? So I'm stuck with what's in the country already, or what somebody's prepared to bring in more in bulk perhaps. And boy, is that going to see the prices rocket, I suspect. So anyway, if you can physically pick your plant up before you buy it, you're on a much safer bet than just looking at pictures. But looking at pictures is second best, if that's all there is. Buying blind is not so good unless you really trust the seller. You will get plant like in pictures. Yeah, how like? How similar? Like, this is a plant that we had once that was a few months off blooming, and what we've got now is some 2-year-old plants. That's not like in pictures, is it? You know, a plant with a dendrobium with perhaps 6 or 7 canes, and you get a plant with 2 canes. That's not like in pictures, is it? So they will stitch you up online. But if you can get to your plant, pick it up. First thing, does it wobble? Does it flop around at the base and the whole of the plant's moving like that? Because if it is, it's got a lousy root system, you can almost guarantee, and it might have had a good one and they've died. Stick your finger in the media. Is it soggy? Stick it under your nose. Does it smell? If it does, put the flipping thing back, because you're only taking home trouble. I mean, when you get good, you can take home plants with lousy root systems and get them going again. But it doesn't always work. Even long-term experienced growers still fail in those cases, but perhaps have a better success rate. So, does it wobble? Next thing, why is it staked? Have a look at the stakes. Are the stakes there purely to hold a bloom spike, or have they got a secondary function of holding the plant still in the pot? Like you do sometimes when you repot a plant. You stake the plant to stop it moving around. Because they'll cheat. They'll make it look like the stakes were there just for the bloom spikes, and they're actually trying to hold the plant still because it's got no roots and it flops around in the pot. You know, wobble it around too much, it'll just fall off because there's nothing to hold it in there. So nice firm plant in the pot that doesn't move around. If it's in a clear pot, you should be able to see some roots and the state they're in. And again, you need to get to know what roots look like for the different types of plants, because they will vary. We all know what Phalaenopsis roots look like. Everybody does, because most people started with a Phalaenopsis anyway. Nice, thick, fleshy roots. They can be a silvery white colour, because it hasn't been watered lately. They can be green, because it's been watered recently and it's just soaked up the water. Anything in between, well, what they shouldn't be is brown. If they're brown, they're dead, or they're dying. They're on their way out, let's put it that way. And they don't come back to life, but occasionally in that state they'll branch and produce some new branches to the root. Depends how far gone it's got. Other types of plants may have fine root systems, like little white hairs in amongst the media, and that's okay for that type of plant. Some of them may have thicker, fleshier roots, but they're very, very delicate. They're brittle. Although they look fleshy, they're not. They break as soon as you look at them. But then you start to think about the plants that just are normally okay. Most Phalaenopsis that you buy are probably going to be okay. Even the mass-produced ones in a garden centre, providing they haven't been sat there for a long time and abused, you know, they're relatively new in, they'll be in pretty good condition, you know. But the longer they keep them without selling them, the worse they're going to get. And I think some of the supermarkets have an exchange. So the guy who comes round with the new orchids brings new ones in and takes the old ones away that haven't been sold. I don't know what happens to them. Hate to think. They end up in the garden centres, I expect. The do-it-yourself stores and the garages and places. Anyway, so try and learn how to see and choose a good plant. And a lot of that is look at plants. Look at people's videos, look at the plants, look at pictures on the internet. What does this plant, what should this plant look like? How big should it be? And if it's in bloom, all the pictures you've seen have got a bloom spike with 20, 25 blooms on, and this plant's got a spike with 4. It's not happy. It's something not quite right. So look at your plant, get to know your plants, and eventually you make your purchase. You will make some mistakes. I'm still making them. I've been doing it donkey's years. I'll still get a duff one now and again. And I've even bought one. I bought a Phalaenopsis at a show, obviously last year, because there haven't been any this year. I just loved the colour. And that plant came home, and within 3 weeks it had died. This is a Phalaenopsis, for sake. I was so cross. And Hannah bought one as well. She really liked it, and she bought one as well with her own money. And hers died in a week. And then I found several other people that had bought them at the same show from the same supplier, and theirs had gone down as well. There was something wrong with the whole set of plants. Now you can't avoid that sort of thing, because that wasn't the people who'd bought them's fault. They all went to different environments, you know, some went to houses, one went here. So something was wrong with the plants to start with, and most of the time you will never know that until you've had it home for a while and it just goes down quite quickly, and it can happen. I don't know what was wrong with those. Given the time of year, I can't see how they could have got chilled, but something went wrong with them and they all passed away. Ceased to be. And I object to paying a reasonable amount of money for a Phalaenopsis when I can get them for a £5, you know, in the DIY stores, £8 with a decorative pot, you know, and I paid a fair bit of money for a Phalaenopsis that didn't even make the end of the month, so I was cross. So choose your plants carefully if you can. Your experience will grow. In that arena, you will get better at recognising a good plant to start with. And if you start with a good plant, you're onto a much better, safer road than you are picking up these dodgy rescues, even though it'll happen. So next thing is assess whether that plant can stay in the pot you bought it in, and if so, how long. That will take experience. And a lot of that can be gained by sticking that in a pot. You'll get to recognise the smell of media that's going off. Because it's not nice for a start. It smells like a damp, horrible cellar where somebody grows mushrooms, basically. A mouldy, fausty smell. Not nice. There's something fresh about good media that's in good nick. It's got a buoyant, fresh smell. Not necessarily earthy, but you'll get to know the difference. And assess, can that plant stay in the pot for a bit? Don't let the fact that it's in bloom stop you making a decision. Put that as secondary. I've repotted so many different types of orchids in full bloom, and apart from one, I've never lost the blooms as a consequence. I may have shortened their life a little, but I didn't lose them, and it didn't damage the plant leaving them on. The best thing is know when to repot, and when the new roots are growing, that's your time, no matter what the orchid type is. With Phalaenopsis, you can't always do that, because they grow a root now and again. You know, there isn't really a huge spurt of root growth, unless it hasn't got any and you've managed to recover it, in which case there may be a spurt. But under normal circumstances, they put out a root now and again. Preferably some growing tips in your pot that you can physically see, because a lot of the Phalaenopsis are sold in clear pots now, so you can see what's going on in the pot. Most of the other types you buy aren't, which is a shame. But yeah, if these type, well, that's my new spikes, my Phalaenopsis is starting to show its buds now. They haven't broken out of the sheath yet, but I've had to move it down onto this. This is my lowest shelf with height. So it's had to come down here, otherwise it's touching the roof. But these are the plants where most of the mistakes are made. These are intergenerics, mass-produced in Holland, Germany, places like that, and bought in bulk by large vendors, supermarkets, garden centres and stuff like that. And they are normally in a generic fibrous media, which is good for them, in the nursery, where they've got the temperature, full control over watering, and they only get watered when they need to be watered, en masse, you know. Temperatures are right, day lengths are right, light levels are right, it's in perfect conditions. And under those circumstances, they will grow flipping good root systems in that media. Unfortunately, the media doesn't last forever, and it will depend how far off of good it's gone, because if it goes too far and starts to really go off, the root system will die, and that's when you find your plants wobbling around in the pot and won't stand up. Yeah. Now this stake on here I put in there. Did I? Actually no, I didn't. Oh good, so that makes a good example. I've just looked at the clip that's holding it and I don't use those clips, so this is a stake that was on it already. So let's have a look and see what it's doing. It's quite near the edge of the pot. It's touching the base of the spike inside those leaves and not anything else. So it's not been rammed down next to a pseudo bulb, yeah? But because it is staked, you can't tell whether that plant would move without that stake. But I would virtually guarantee it. Unfortunately, these clips are a pain in the backside to take off. You'll have to trust me. If I took the clips off the spike, the chances are the spike would probably stay there now. It's so thick and chunky. The stake was probably put there to guide it into an upright position. But if I took the clips off and took the stake out, I could virtually guarantee that this plant won't wobble around. But don't forget, top heavy starts to generate movement. So a big heavy spike sticking up in the air, you might see some movement down here that isn't due to a lack of a root system, it's just due to the fact that plant's top heavy. But this will have a reasonable root system for a while. Won't last forever, but it will have one for now. And I know that without taking it out of the pot, because they are difficult to take out of the pot when the spikes are staked. So there we go. Yeah, so try and get to know what a good root system should look like. And if it's in a pot that you can't see through, non-clear pot, then have a little scratch around the surface. Because the base of the plant is where all the roots are coming out from, you know, out in all directions, including straight down on some types of orchids. So there should be some signs of white roots at the base, even though you might not be able to see the growing tips if there are any. But it's better than nothing, it's better than not looking, you know. So do what you can, inspect your plants as best you can before you pick them up and take them home. Now I'm guilty, I mean I've walked into Burnham's before now. Oh, this is funny, this is, especially as I got told off. I walked in on a day at Burnham's when a couple of orchids, it was like a little festival, and a couple of orchid societies had joined in with Sarah to put on some good displays, yeah, so like a show as such. Basically I walked in the door, and you've seen video of the sales area if you haven't been there. It's very long. You've got most of the dry stuff up near the tills, you know, the bags of stuff, charcoal, pots, all that sort of stuff, and then it goes into the first lot of the display area, display benches where the plants start. and you've got areas in the middle that you can walk right round, several of those, and then all down the sides, so, and along the back before you go into the greenhouses. So you've got an area like that. And as I walked in the door, I saw the most beautiful Disa down in the corner of the sales area. And it was busy. There were quite a few people in there. I made a beeline, nearly barged people out of the way. Get out of the way, get out of the way, like that. And I grabbed this Disa and I was off back up to the till to start my box. And somebody said, "Oi, what are you doing?" And I suddenly realised I'd grabbed one of the plants off of one of the Orchid Society displays. It wasn't for sale at all. I was off with it. You know, and that, it was one of those, I saw it and I thought I must have that. So I did the, you know, pretty blooms must have. It was also a plant that I really liked. Anyway, you know, don't get caught too much with pretty blooms must have. That's the thing that wears off after a while. And with some people it never wears off. You can still walk into a sales area and go, "Oh, I must have that." You know, even if you've been growing 50 years, you'll still do it. But try to put some logic in there as well. Will that plant do okay for me? So that's that. And quite honestly, those bits that I've covered are where most of the mistakes are going to be. Getting the wrong sort of plant for your, you know, where you've decided to grow your orchids, it's probably not going to be that successful. Buying plants that are not in a reasonable state, or buying plants that are in a poor state, thinking you can recover them when you haven't had a lot of practice at that, and on record, you know you haven't had a lot of success at doing that, but you keep getting them. I mean, I just class that as a recurring mistake, but one day you'll probably get good at it if you keep going long enough. I don't know. So anyway, you've got your plant home. You need to know whether you need to repot it as a now thing, and some of them will be. Doesn't matter if they got 2 or 3 spikes in full flood. If that pot is going, that media needs to come out, or what few roots you may have left you'll lose, and you can end up with nothing. And it finishes blooming, you go to repot it and you've got nothing to work with, and because of the blooms and the bad root system that has been there a while, the bulbs will be starting to shrivel, the plant's now going down. You may save it, you may not. But don't let it get like that if you can. So keep your media fresh, keep it going, and by keeping records of when you repot things and what you put in the pot, you'll know that this media in my place, with that type of plant and the amount of water it's going to get, is going to last 2 years. So from this date, I need to think about repotting here. And you know it's coming. You make sure you've got fresh media ready to go. Do you need bigger pot? Because it's grown well. Have you got that bigger pot? Get yourself ready for these repotting periods. Plan. Plan ahead. I love that poster. There's a guy painting a huge notice and he's got plan, a hair and a little arrow pointing to the D on the next line. Plan ahead. Yeah. Anyway, growing your orchids on, quite honestly, is the easy bit. It really is. Getting the right plants in the first place, putting them in an environment that's reasonably suited to them, and watering them and feeding them at appropriate times. Now there's a skill that will develop over time. And getting that a long way off could cost you plants. But always remember the statement that many experienced growers will give you the same statement: watering too often kills more plants than not watering often enough. Soggy bottoms, soggy roots, soggy media goes off quicker. Yeah. So, and most orchids will be quite happy to borderline dry out in between. Some of them need to totally dry out in between. That's their way. That bit you've got to pick up. You've got to read or talk to people and find out which are those. And those that need that wet dry cycle, try and remember to ask or look up, does it need a fast wet dry cycle, like daily? Because they're not going to be so easy to look after depending on the media you choose. And then you start getting into the experience of what sort of media should I really use for this plant. Never mind what it's in now. In my conditions, with my watering frequencies, What do I need to put it in to make its roots happy, or keep its roots happy? So the looking after bit, you will come to what I call your own repot. So you're repotting a plant that you potted in the first place, and you may not have got to that stage yet. People who are newer at growing orchids might not have reached that second repot yet. But I can guarantee, if you're looking after your plants reasonably well and you've got your head round the watering, when you come to do it the second time, that will be a nice happy plant comes out of that pot. And when it goes in its new media, if it's done at the right time, it'll stay a happy plant and it won't sulk and it won't be set back. So there you go. Light levels, again, you just got to look it up or talk to people. I mean, I've moved 2 plants today. I did a bit of reading this morning because I was up early. What have I moved? I've moved moved it to somewhere I can't remember already. We did it a couple of hours ago. I've moved this project plant. Yeah? That was in the part 1 on Psidiums. Why have I moved it? Because I did a little bit of reading. And there's more writings and scrolls and ancient, you know, hieroglyphics that say that needs brighter light than I'm giving it, than say keep it shaded. Just don't forget the country. If somebody in Florida says keep it shaded, they probably mean it. If somebody in the UK says keep it shaded, they're probably wrong. That needs good light. Not necessarily direct sun, that might be pushing your luck, and early morning, late afternoon maybe, but that needs much brighter light. I had it right in under here. So that wasn't getting much light at all. Now it's gone in a place where for part of the day, if the sun comes out, it will be directly on it through one layer of shade netting. And the other one, the little one that's in a pot, has gone up here with the cattleyas. Again, this time of year, it probably can't stay there when we come into spring. And I put it with, it's got a front and a back, this plant, strange, but that's how it is, because all the leaves are leaning that way. So if I put it facing the light like that, it's not going to get much extra light. But by turning it that way, it gets quite a bit more. Nice to see some roots growing on that, because there aren't many. So that's gone up on the cattleya shelf, at the back, not right up against the glass. So I've just moved 2 plants to change their light levels, and hopefully they will improve. I got told about the zygos, which I was keeping quite shady down here, where my Phalaenopsis are now. And somebody who grows zygos very well said, if you keep them shady, they'll grow slowly. And when they grow slowly, the roots are inclined to rot, and sometimes the new growths are as well. They become far more vigorous with brighter light. Well, I didn't know that. Remember what I said at the beginning? The learning never stops. So my zygo is now up here, just behind the cattleyas. And during the later afternoon, that gets some sun on its leaves, straight through the glass. This end up here with no shading has got its own natural shading on it because it's wet through. You probably can't see it. There's so much condensation in here this time of year that the wall, there's condensation on the glass which diffuses the light, basically. It diffuses the direct sun. Plus the glass is dirty on the outside as well, and on the inside. Yeah, so you might have to do some adjustments, but make sure you know why you're doing them. And a good reason to make an adjustment is that the plant is just static and doesn't seem to be doing as well as it ought to be. Well, if you leave it there, the chances are it never will, so change something. A lot of the time the change will be a bit more light, sometimes it's a bit less, but not as often. Sometimes it's perhaps not getting enough food. That won't happen often, so get that in there. You don't need lots of food for orchids. Because one's growing reasonably well, doubling the feed level is not liable to double the growth rate. It don't happen like that. There are some really vigorous orchids, but they are thin on the ground. Majority of orchids, relative to other plants, are relatively slow growers, and they don't need a lot of food. And that's one thing that people can waste an awful lot of money on, chucking too much food in the pots or over the plants. They won't use it. They'll only take on board what they need. You can't force more food into them, they won't have it. So Take care with feed levels. That'll help break the media down, and in some cases start a burning chemical process on the roots, which then means they don't function properly and the plant can't take in the nutrients you're giving it because you've messed the roots up. Underfeed rather than overfeed. Underwater rather than the expression I hate, overwater. Water not quite frequently enough rather than too frequently is a better way of thinking it. So yeah. And I think you're not a beginner anymore when you don't have things that are worrying you all the time. And when I come out here sometimes to, like, you know, a massive, I water all my pots together because the frequency has gone right off now. It's sort of 9 or 10 days between watering the pots. There's a few that get watered in the middle of there because they're recently repotted. They dry too fast. But apart from that, I just come out here and water my plants. Sometimes I'm not even really looking at them or even thinking about what I'm doing because it's a repetitive process that's just been going on. What changes through the seasons is the frequency and the feed level. Massive growing season, you know, come March, April time, up the feed because they'll use it. We've got up in the feed in the middle of winter, is it? So these things you get to know. Talking to people, reading, looking stuff up, yeah, watching videos, all that sort of stuff. And don't ever take one thing as gospel. Try and get some backup. You know, if somebody says, what you need to do with that is so-and-so, so-and-so. Why have they told you that? Did they just read it somewhere? Is it true? Is it based on practical experience? In which case, it might only be true in their growing environment and isn't going to work for you. Go steady what you take on. Try and think through. Somebody's telling you something. Where did they get that information from? Well, training day again. Planes are about. It's a lovely day out today. Blue sky and cold. Winter feels right today. It feels like winter. Cold. Yeah, so I think the knowledge comes over periods of time. How long that takes will depend on the variety of orchids you grow, the number of orchids you've got, and quite honestly the number of mistakes you make that you don't make more than once or twice. I'll add twice in because sometimes you didn't really know it was a mistake. Yeah, but then you find out it was a mistake. Well, that's the time not to do it again. Yeah, but sometimes it's already happened a second time. But that's where the learning comes in. If something's going wrong with a plant, try and find out why. Don't just bin it. You may end up binning it, but try and find out what went wrong. Do a bit of research. What does this plant like? How close was I to giving it what it wanted? How far off its comfort zone was I? And if you weren't, if everything seems right, then you start looking underground because most problems with orchids are below the base of the plant. Now that can be on a mount, but not as often. So it'll be in the pot, the problem will be in the pot. Media going off, most common cause. Plant staying dry too long for that type of plant. Plant staying wet too long for that type of plant. All these things. It sounds like a vast amount of info that you've got to get in there. Well, you don't take it in all at once. It comes in over time until eventually, like with me for instance, I'd say the learning never stops, but there are whole days when I don't learn anything and sometimes weeks. And then a little snippet, like the Psychopsis. That's knowledge I didn't have. Now I've got it, I've dealt with it. And it might explain why they've been doing badly and just not growing very well and not growing very fast. It certainly explains the zygos. And although I didn't back that up, I had the confidence enough to believe the person who told me, because they're growing them pretty good and they can explain why. That's the difference. A lot of the time when somebody passes on information and makes it a statement and can't really elaborate, it's because they've read it or somebody else told them. Bloke at the pub told me, you know. I went up the pub, bloke said, must be true. Is it? And that even applies to some books. Just because it says it in a book don't mean it's right. It may have been right 50 years ago in that person's environment that wrote the book. You never know. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, but don't let it bother you that you think of yourself as a beginner. If you can buy a Phalaenopsis and it's blooming every single year, are you a beginner? Because a lot of people buy a Phalaenopsis and it never blooms again. So you're doing better than some, yeah? But don't get down. Don't let it get to you. It's a hobby at the end of the day. It's supposed to be for enjoyment. And to enjoy it at its best, you need some knowledge. Well, get it. Deal with it. Do some research, do some reading, do some watching, do some talking. Do it. Don't do it all at once. You'll get brain block where you've taken in so much information. Some of it's gone in one side and straight out the other and didn't stay. And some of it you might not have even understood, but you carried on listening. You know, if somebody's explaining something to you and you don't understand, stop them. Say, hold on a minute, what do you mean by that? I don't understand that at all. And they'll, with any luck, if they know what they're talking about, try saying it a different way. If you ask that sort of thing and the person says it exactly the same again, and then you say pardon and they say exactly the same thing again, they probably don't know what they're talking about. Because you should be able to reword things differently enough that that person can understand. And you can see the face change as the understanding goes in. Right. That'll do for today. I haven't got anything to do out here today. I watered so much yesterday and the day before. And as I said, my potted plants, they just come round so infrequently now. And some of them even don't get watered then. If I go 9 days and I pick a pot up and it's still wet, it's going to go another 9 days. So it's gone 18 days between watering. They don't get missed twice. But yeah, giving plant water when it doesn't really need it because it's Friday and I water my plants on Friday is the way to lose roots. That's something you will get. I know lifestyles mean that I only have this day to work with my orchids. Well, get orchids that work with that. Yeah? If you can't change that, then get orchids that it works for. You'll find out which ones it doesn't work for. You know, I water on Saturday mornings because I'm at work all week. Saturday mornings I deal with my orchids. And this type of orchid is bone dry, and it shouldn't be. Well, that's not the best sort of orchid for you to have with that lifestyle. Yeah? So, try and gear that up as well. There was something I was going to... Oh, I was going to show that Masdevallia that's come out. Singular, one. Because this one hasn't been in bloom for some time. And it's a very, very attractive Masdevallia. I don't know how close I'll be able to get, but it's just a very attractive bloom. It's typical Masdevallia shape, so it's got that going for it. It's not too trumpet-like, because some of the long trumpet-like ones, you know, you've got to really get right at the right angle to look down inside to take full advantage of the view. With some Masdevallias you can view from angles and they still look good. You know, I mean, this one's still showing good colour on a sideways angle, you know. Now, if anybody asks me about growing Masdevallias, chances are I will refer them to somebody else, because I don't grow these very good. So I'm not the best person to ask. All I can say is what I do, and what little bit has worked and what large amounts haven't worked. So that's how it goes with those. Most of my dendrobiums do well, most of my oncidium types and cattleyas do well, and some oddities. So there we go then, but don't get despondent because you think you're a beginner and you don't know what the hell you're doing. You'll pick it up. It's not rocket science, they're just plants. They're not like other plants. Get that in there. So if they're not like other plants, what is different about them? And the list of what's different about them is not huge. And then how do you deal with those differences? Well, if the list of differences isn't huge, the way you handle them isn't huge. And try and condense the stuff you need to know and get rid of for now the stuff that's just nice to know. You'll pick that up later. When the bulk of the knowledge has gone in, the little bits can trickle in later. Don't try and do it all at once. And everybody loses a plant now and again. You know, you shouldn't be losing them by the dozen, but, you know, we all lose plants. You know, people who've been growing 50 years still lose a plant. It happens, you know. Anyway, I'm off. What am I going to do? I'm going to watch some snooker, I think, this afternoon. I put together the part 2 of the 2020 project Orchids. The only bits that are missing are the today clips, you know, the clips of the plant as it is now, which I will probably film tomorrow, providing it's not chucking it down with rain. So we'll get there. So yeah, a little chat around the subject of, you know, everybody has to learn sometime, everybody's a beginner at some point, and some people may still be classed as a beginner in 3 years' time, and some drop that status in 6 months quite quickly. A lot of it will depend on how much time you spend with your orchids and how much time you can put in to the hobby away from the plants themselves, the learning bit, and how much of it stays there and how much of it you document so that you can recall it if the old memory's not so good, which, you know, we're all getting older whether we like it or not. My memory still seems to be hanging in there at the moment most of the time, and I forgot what I was going to say now. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.